Inspired by the latest Super Mario Galaxy film direct and the heavy featuring of Odyssey elements like the T-Rex and the Sand Kingdom, I wanted to do a speculative video concerning the potential future for Nintendo of Super Mario Odyssey. As we can see from the Nintendo Switch 2 editions that are launching, even old games are being seen as potential candidates for some kind of expansion or revival on the Switch 2. And if you look at the biggest hitters on Switch, it's hard to look past Super Mario Odyssey for its immense potential. Clearly, the Sand Kingdom is going to feature to at least some small degree in the new film, and while it may only end up being a couple of minutes in the final event, it definitely puts in the spotlight a game that for a long time now has been rather quiet, the nearly 9-year-old Super Mario Odyssey. Now, to be clear up front, I think we're talking about possibilities that are relatively remote in this video. My central expectation is that Odyssey won't receive a significant push this year beyond them continuing to wish to sell the game and promote it, that it looks shiny and new on Switch 2, thanks to Panic Button's work on it during 2025. I remain of the view that there will be a major 3D Mario offering this year, but this channel is often about exploring contingencies and options and what-if scenarios, and one that springs to mind is, what could they do with Super Mario Odyssey? After all, we can't assume that everything's going to go to plan behind the scenes, and I think there are certain scenarios where Odyssey represents a significant opportunity for the company to save their own bacon if they're struggling to create the next game in the Mario series on time. If a new 3D Mario is right round the corner, I don't think it would be too useful for Nintendo to deploy Odyssey right now, but if the game isn't going to be out until 2028 or even late 2027, having a smaller 3D Mario title that can nevertheless rack up significant sales off the back of movie-related promotion might be of some use to them. For one thing, the title has been relatively quiet, with only a few amendments in all these years. Luigi's Balloon World was added in early 2018, it received a VR mode in 2019 for Labo, and in 2025 the game received that free graphical patch. This, combined with the fact that a major new Mario title is surely inevitable in the next couple of years, has made it understandable why Nintendo wouldn't at the current time try to do too much with Super Mario Odyssey. After all, the Tokyo-based EPD8 team have already been split to work on Bowser's Fury with the Nintendo Software Technology and Donkey Kong Bonanza, with a mainly new team assembled at the start of this decade, pivoting off a core concept established, it seems, around 2018 or 19. Yet another bolt-on title might seem like an odd move for a team whose core focus surely must be the next major Mario title. The difficulty is that the game does not have enormous scope for expansion with a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, at least if we're talking about the kind of thing we've seen in recent months from other titles from the Switch. Nintendo is unlikely to break the $80 barrier, and certainly not for an adaptation of a prior game. This means that we're talking of about $20 worth of content, and I suspect new zones and locations are likely to be off the table, at least to any significant degree. However, when you consider the strategy Nintendo has at present, it may not matter if they have completely new areas to them, if they can do a lot more with the existing areas. One benefit of Sand Kingdom, notably, is that it is a huge and largely empty space. Having a new area rise out of the desert wouldn't require whole new designs, but would just be patching onto an existing landscape. It's possible that many of the Odyssey locations could receive a similar glow-up in much the same way as Wonder appears to be adding in the Koopalings to encourage people to revisit past locations. Now, of course, although the film did feature the Sand Kingdom, it's very likely that Illumination were drawing from suggestions from the Mario team, and while they may just have thought that Sand Kingdom was a particularly cool place to set the opening to the movie, it may well have been one that Nintendo specifically suggested if they had intentions to use it again in mind. However, the obvious massive opportunity with Odyssey is to develop a kind of multiplayer option in the game. Until we see a light model console, the major way Nintendo can promote itself to cost-conscious families is as the Switch 2 being a device which supplements and enhances people's already bought individual Switch consoles, and Odyssey would be a perfect central hub for this kind of endeavour. Adding in other characters, Luigi, Yoshi, Peach, Rosalina, even Toad, would open the game up to the whole family, although it would have a high testing requirement because you'd need to ensure that the levels were optimized for every single character, but all the same, it might be a way to create a new experience out of Odyssey without starting from scratch. The idea of Odyssey being essentially a holiday-making game where you go around collecting souvenirs and taking photographs is already kind of locked in, so if Nintendo delivered on this still further, added to each area cultural centres such as art galleries, cinemas and racetracks, they could turn a sandbox game into the kind of place that people can go and hang out in Mario's world online while still playing the core Mario Odyssey game. Does EPD8 have the spare development capacity for something like this? Well, maybe. Remember that Emerald Rush was kicked out of the door in September 2025. If by this time Nintendo knew that their next Mario game was not in fact going to be able to release in 2026, and therefore they would have to have some kind of serious discussions about the future, it's possible that that team might have been brought into consideration. Frankly, a $20 add-on only weeks after Bonanza launched felt like an oddly rushed follow-up to such a celebrated game to me, but the logic makes sense from Nintendo's point of view if you assume that they needed that team to be pitching onto a different project entirely. This would also be consistent with the need for the top Donkey Kong team, likely including director Kazuo Takahashi, to spend some time prototyping and reflecting before being ready to launch a brand new Donkey Kong project. If that endeavour is likely to take a year or so to plan out, well, an Odyssey Nintendo Switch 2 edition project with a planned release of October 2026 might be a perfect interstitial thing for the team to work on. It would also explain why Panic Button and not EPD8 handled the port. One, because they may not have originally planned to leverage Odyssey in this way anyway, but two, because they wanted to focus on the gameplay elements with their limited development capabilities. Of course, it's most likely that they are just working on the next Mario game and potentially on the next Donkey Kong title, but it still remains something that could be conceived of if they were to have this gap in the schedule for 2026. Now, of course, the plan for the Sand Kingdom to appear in the film would have been long preceding the decision that we're talking about here. So while this theory assumes that an Odyssey Plus game was the contingency plan for the lack of a mainline Mario, another option is that when the film was being planned, presumably around 2023, they also decided to do a Super Mario Odyssey follow-up. Not necessarily a full sequel, but some kind of reuse of the areas from that game. Before now, I speculated that it's possible that we could see two different Mario teams producing projects this generation. If this were to happen, it would make sense to have a course-based 3D Mario team in the tradition of 3D World and the Galaxy titles alongside a more open and sandboxy 3D Mario project following in the path of 64, Sunshine and Odyssey. But what if Nintendo were able to take and remix Odyssey areas for a sandbox-style game? After all, Tears of the Kingdom was able to recycle and build on the maps of Breath of the Wild, and while the over 6-year wait for that game feels like absolutely ages, a lot of that was doubtless spent on the new mechanics. This strikes me as less probable because 4K assets of the main Kingdoms of Odyssey would already have been available for Panic Button to use, but I wouldn't completely rule it out, especially since for all we know, Panic Button may have completed some work that was already in progress by the core team. Even cannibalizing a handful of iconic locations into a post-game might be an effective use of the past assets. Another possibility is that Nintendo runs with the concept they so successfully introduced into the 2D space and reintroduce the Wonderflower. Whether as DLC or as a whole version of the 3D game, having a succession of courses that largely use recycled elements from previous Mario titles but then use a Wonderflower effect to warp them into strange and new playstyles could be an effective way to utilize old assets and make a game that is both a celebration of Mario and yet basically a stopgap title until the major new 3D Mario game is ready to arrive. Of course, the likeliest option remains that 9 years after the last major title, we will see a Mario this holiday, and if so, Odyssey will be surplus to requirements, for now. However, the release of Super Mario Bros. Plus Edition right before the new film's release may be something that they will see as a useful precedent to repeat if sales are positive, and having the potential to do a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Odyssey may be handy for Nintendo in future years. They like to have significant and high-hype projects that are short of a full new game up their sleeve for anniversaries and the like. One last thought. Koichi Harashida has long been associated with the 3D Mario series, but in 2019 he came over to support the 2D group. He and Wonder director Shiro Mori were jointly credited as offering development support on that project, which I assume means they kibitzed on bits and pieces for Maker, while the bulk of their focus was on getting Wonder off the ground. Nevertheless, they do have some experience of developing Mario Maker. And also, Hayashida's deep experience with particularly course-based 3D Mario games would make him the ideal person to lead the long-held dream of a Super Mario 3D Maker game. Generally, visions of a 3D Mario Maker would focus around the sedate little 64-bit Mario and dumpy 3D World Mario pottering around 3D spaces and making course-based experiences. But what if Hayashida and the team were to take the brakes off and aim to make a truly AAA experience with capturable dinosaurs and makeable towns? Remember that idea of holiday making? What if, as well as simply offering course-based thrills, you could go on holiday to someone else's 3D Mario world, take photographs, meet the locals, look at the local cars, look at the local hats and shops and all the kinds of things that we see in Odyssey, but populating new kinds of locations in the 3D Mario Maker game. Minecraft is huge enough across the world, but on Switch in Japan, it is notably absolutely vast. And while Nintendo is deeply reluctant to draw from external ideas, eventually they catch on. And especially as younger developers who grew up on Minecraft start to reach more senior positions, the possibilities of being able to Odyssey across player-made worlds might open up Mario to a whole new audience, while simultaneously maintaining the two vital parts of their overall content strategy, the Nintendo Online Service and Game Chat, which I don't think they're nearly done with pushing. It would also be great for mouse mode, and of course, it would encourage people from the Animal Crossing fanbase to pop over to Mario, which would also enhance the link between those two games. The Maker team last had a game in 2019. Hayashida was supporting on Wonder, but may well have had other projects he was supervising, and of course the Wonder Group launched that game in 2023. So it feels plausible that late 2026 could see a major Mario Maker entry with a roughly 3-year window of full-on development and about 6 years or 7 years of long-term development. All things considered, I do think there's a strong chance that we will see more from Odyssey at some point. Apart from anything else, and apologies if this makes anyone feel old, but the game is now old enough to have a nostalgic quality for young adults who played it in childhood, and that cohort will grow each year. Sometime mid-generation, an Odyssey expansion might make a lot of sense. For now, though, I think it remains a modest but not impossible shot, and if there's no major Mario title after all, then the odds probably rocket up. I usually try to forecast in 5 categories, and this is between the lowest two for me, but since historically I've been overcautious with my 30% calls, I'll push the boat out and say there's a 30% chance that we see a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Odyssey by the end of March 2027. As for a 3D Mario Maker, I think the odds this year are also around 30%, and if there's no major 3D Mario, then both this and Odyssey would actually work well as a 1-2 punch of Mario titles, much like new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe and Super Mario Maker 2 were released within a 5-month window of each other in 2019. But do let me know what you think, and check out the Patreon for more cool stuff. I will look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again for another Nintendo Forecast.